Hello, it's Saturday evening and it's a little bit dark in here. I power read this over 2 days. And if you've watched my channel for any time, you've seen that I've had a couple surgeries over the last 2 years. And this year, I'm approaching the end of the year, and I've been blessed to not have a surgery in 2025. And I'm hoping that continues. But the problem that I have with my health rears its head every so often, and it kind of started this week. And I've got my stack of C.S. Lewis books. And I thought, wow, I better read this problem of pain quickly just in case I end up having surgery again, and or just suffering a little bit more than normal. So this book, like I said, I power read it in 2 days, and it is 162 pages. I was up at 2 o'clock in the morning the first night and read, I think, around 40 pages. The next morning, read another 60 pages, and so I was up to 100, and then I finished it off today in one sitting this morning. And I found this book very fascinating. In my opinion, if you look up C.S. Lewis's bibliography, the Christian books that are nonfiction are his better ones. The fiction ones get pretty weird. And honestly, Chronicles of Narnia I've reviewed in the past, and a lot of those are kind of weird too. Mere Christianity, up until this point, was the best nonfiction one that I've read. And I think this one surpassed that. I'm not sure how many people that are avid readers of C.S. Lewis would say that this tops that book, but I think it does. And it covers an awful lot of subject matter. Some of it was similar, and he kind of starts from, he was previously an atheist, and he kind of starts for this book using the arguments that atheists use against God. If he is all-knowing and people end up suffering, then he must be an evil God. Or maybe there isn't one at all, kind of a situation, right? He addresses that logic, and then he counters it with his other logic and faith. So it's there's an introduction. The second chapter is divine omnipotence, which is an all-knowing God. And then he covers divine goodness and why God is good. And then human wickedness goes into not only original sin, but it also goes into, at least in my thinking, this book spurred a lot of thought. You got to make the parallel with people making the original sin in the garden with Satan and his angels and how they got kicked out of heaven and why, and the punishment that was made for them that is extended for persons that don't embrace salvation. And it isn't God doing it to the person, it's the person doing it to themselves, right? So I wondered while reading this if Satan, after being kicked out of heaven for comparing himself to God, if that was akin to the unforgivable sin, or if perhaps he made repentance if he'd been allowed to come back. And I've never heard anybody explore that thought. It's not in the book per se, but I did start thinking about it because aside from the unpardonable sin that the Bible talks about, pretty much everything we do, we can be forgiven of, and we have a chance to kind of get past it. He talks a lot about modern psychology and things of that nature that focus on making you feel good rather than admitting the errors that you have. Because ultimately, I think a lot of psychologists and also society wants you to feel okay about yourself in general so that you don't perhaps become problems for other people. But this one kind of says, hey, take yourself back and center yourself because you have faults that you got to fix and that you need some help with. And that is in the fall of man category. And then ultimately, the human pain talked about in The Problem of Pain is directly associated with the fall of man. So, in essence, one of the topics was be if a person is like a housewife and she's taking care of her kids and she's just living a regular old normal life, how does that person end up in hell if they don't believe? And it's because of the fact that the original sin carried on from our prior generations to us. And it's interesting how he frames that as he goes on in the book, because he talks about how it even affected animals and things of that sort, how the animals at the beginning in the garden were not predators eating each other and attacking each other and having that kind of a vile nature. That the original sin in the garden messed up the entire plan and made the animals have to, attack each other to survive and eat and things of that nature. And it also carries on forward to everybody else. And he made a way for us to get out of that problem. And it's up to us to resolve the issue. Now, the question is your pride so much that you can't admit that you need his assistance? That's the main crux of this that I got out of it. You've heard the story of the guy on the roof and the flood is starting, and he prays to God once, "Hey, save me, I'm stuck on the roof." And then a boat comes by, and the guy says, "Hey, jump in my boat." And he says, "No, I'm waiting for God to send me or to save me." And then another boat goes by, and no, I'm waiting for God to save me. And then finally, a helicopter comes as the water is all the way up to the top of the ridge of the roof. I'm waiting for God to save me. And then the helicopter leaves, and the guy drowns. He gets to heaven. He says, "God, why didn't you save me?" And he said, "I sent 2 boats and a helicopter." He's already provided us with the helicopter, but ultimately we have to decide to get in the helicopter. So that is what determines our final outcome. And he goes into just there's a lot of topics in this book. It's too much to summarize. If you read the wiki summary for this after the fact, it was still mind-blowing how much you can get out of this book. And I would say that it's probably one that you could read more than once, because you're not going to catch it all. It's very deep. And at the beginning especially, I found myself struggling with his verbiage, because he was Oxford material and has a tendency to speak in very large references to people of that time that were popular and famous and learned. And for a modern day person, it's going to be a struggle to understand those references unless you look them all up. And most of that's maybe generational, but he is obviously an intelligent person, makes it kind of hard to follow. But after the beginning, maybe 30, 40 pages, it seemed like he kind of narrowed that down a little bit from scholarly speak to maybe more layman terms. At least either that or my brain adapted to the complicated nature of his speak. I'm not sure which. Like I said, these were long session readings, so maybe I just adjusted. I'm not sure. But he goes into, towards the end too, a very interesting segment about pets and how they've been domesticated and they're different from wild animals. And then the funny part was his scholarly friend said, don't go into does the animal go to heaven or not, because does an animal have a soul? Do they not have a soul? He talked about the intelligence of certain animals and how they were very akin to humans, like the apes and the elephants, and how they have reason and logic. Of course, they can't read English, so they can't see the word of God, the Bible. So they don't per se get that information unless someone was speaking to the elephant, I suppose. But then he says something akin to the argument of another scholarly person was, what happens to the mosquito? And then he jokingly says, well, perhaps because the mosquito causes so much problems for people that they'll end up in hell with the ones that don't believe as well. That was clearly just a joke, but it is a fascinating idea of the different levels of animals And he said even nature in the plant world, that plants attack other plants. It even implied that the original sin in the garden kind of messed up the way plant um, life occurs. And all of these problems will get sorted out later on in heaven. We'll have a system that's different than what it is. He at the very end he starts talking about heaven, the last chapter, and our striving for heaven, even if we don't know what it means fully or understand our desire for heaven. Um, Again, before that though, he mentioned how he either mentioned this or I was thinking about it, how God gave domain of the animals to man. So we have power and control over the animals, kind of do what we want with them. And I kind of felt like, my cat was sitting there with me. He's a so loving creature. He knows when I'm having a hard time. He comes over and gives me special treatment. And I thought, if I have dominion over the animals, God, let me bring this one with me because that cat is super special. I don't know if I could bring all of my pets. I would like to. It's not up to me to decide. Not sure what will happen with all of that. But the longing for heaven that we fully don't understand and we desire is inherently into us unless we have allowed the selfish nature to take over. And that is basically the leave me alone. I want to do whatever I want to do. I don't want to be bothered with you over here, God, even though you kind of made a way for me. And that is what separates us from Him and requires people to be in a place of punishment. And then he mentioned several scriptures that were interesting in here. There were several describing hell from the word of Christ himself. One talked about ultimate destruction, which everybody thinks means that it comes to an end, that a person ends. And that's just it, right? And then there's other scriptures that Jesus spoke that talked about torment. And his theory on that was that your human existence or your soul somehow is like a piece of wood that when it's thrown into a fire, the ashes still remain, but the wood does not. And somehow the human soul in the wrong place is changed because it has to, based on the fire, and fire is referred to all the time as a purifying agent, right? It's like it's trying to get rid of those bad elements of a person. And since they haven't been forgiven because they didn't want it, that fire, I guess, is attempting to get rid of those things, but there's still something, according to his theory, left over. And that thing keeps on in another realm that's not heaven, because that's the choice it made to be left alone and selfish, I suppose. And then finally, after the heaven at the very end, there was a really, really interesting 3-page appendix. And this was from R. Havard, MD. And he talks about the different kinds of human pain. And this was super interesting. It's worth the book just for the last part of it. It talks about short attacks of severe pain and the responses of people. Then it talks about long continued pain and the way that people respond. And it also talks about, um, let's see, mental pain and how a lot of that could ultimately be worse than physical pain. And then it talks about, what's the other kind? A long illness, how that has different responses from people. And then the one is chronic melancholy, which is like the worst, that can drive people to lose their grip on sanity. All of these, they said, and those sometimes can be recovered, even though probably most don't. Some can, but it says after that, surprisingly little changes for that person in their original way of thinking, or I guess in their psyche. So the last line, pain provides an opportunity for heroism. the opportunity is seized with surprising frequency. And according to the doctor's anecdote, that many people show great character in pain. They show great benevolence in pain, depending on the type it is. There's higher success rates of people being positive, I suppose, depending on the kind of pain they're going through. But ultimately, there are a lot of very positive people that are going through really bad things. And ultimately, our choice on how we handle it is in there too, because there are some people that actually use it as a reason to become a tyrant to perhaps their caretakers and things of that nature, where they're mad at the world, I guess, basically, and they're going to let everybody know that if I'm suffering, you're going to suffer as well. So if anyone is going through some kind of pain and they're not sure how to respond to it, this book will give some tidbits on that and how to strive to respond the right way. And of course, if you're a believer, you should be trying to do that in the first place, right? Because ultimately, it's not just about having your faith, but it's about showing your faith. And it's like when I was hospitalized last year, I heard a lot of episodes of people fighting with their nurses and their doctors and just didn't want to be there. Let me out of here. I don't care what you do. Just let me out of here. And it was very, very dark. And it's got to be a very hard existence for those medical staff. And I tried my best to be as nice as I could to everybody there, and actually had one nurse tell me that I was their best patient, which made me feel pretty good because I was trying to be nice to all those people. And so, again, we're supposed to try to be a good person. This tells you that you're capable of it, even in a really bad situation. So, if you think that way, that you can be good, even though you're going through something very bad, you can achieve that. You don't have to make yourself look bad and make others feel bad and kind of make their lives harder because they're dealing with a bunch of stuff on a regular basis, those nurses and doctors. I made a point after COVID to tell all the nurses and doctors I saw at the hospital, I can't imagine what you went through during that pandemic. And I hear all the time on TV, and I'm not dissing any category, but there's always praise for firefighters and police, and they have a hard job too. But the one thing you never hear about on TV is the medical staff and how hard their job is and how you should thank them. They don't get any public recognition that I ever see. They have to deal with probably the worst situations there are, and nobody thanks them. So I made a point telling them, hey, I don't know what it was like for you during COVID, but it must have been horrifying. And I just want to thank you as a person to another person. And I actually made a couple nurses cry because they had some pent up trauma that they had lived through. And I would say just this, whether you're ill, not ill, a believer, a non believer, whoever you are, if you can gain anything out of this at all, besides the fact that you need salvation and that Jesus already did the work, all you have to do is jump on the boat or the helicopter. The other thing that you should do is thank your nurses and doctors if you're able to get hospital assistance. Tell them, thank them, because their job is really, really, just bad. The ones in emergency, oh, they have to deal with some awful situations. I heard it for a few days in a row and just thought, man, if I was in here for a month, I think I'd lose my mind. I would tell you, when I was a young person, before I was out of high school, I got a job at a rest home. And I only worked there, I think, for 2 or 3 days, and I could not take it anymore, and I quit. There is clearly a certain gift for certain people to be caretakers of people that are not aware mentally and not um, able to do most of the things that a person can do for themselves. And I did not feel like I was one of those people because it affected me too much emotionally. I saw some other people in that facility, and I won't tell you where it was, but the ones that continued to work there that had no issues could just lay into some of those older people and yell at them and scream at them, tell them to get back to their rooms, swear at them, and everything else when they're walking the halls if they shouldn't be. And I'm sure that keeping them in their room is an important priority, but the way that it was done was just hair raising. And I could not be part of that situation at all. So I commend the good people working at those kinds of facilities too for having that kind of care and concern over a person that you're not related to or have anything vested in. Just thank you to all of the caretakers, the nurses, the doctors. And again, be a good person. Go thank some of those people, especially if they serve you or a family member. They get a lot of, oh, this is my person. You better do this right, or I'm going to sue you, and this and that. And a lot of families that come in firing their guns because they want, you know, this and that for their person that's in there. And the things they have to listen to, man, is brutal. But anyway, very good book. You probably read it more than once. I think it's better than the case for or a mere Christianity. Um, maybe, maybe not, but it's really good.